Hello and welcome. Well, flashy startups like XPeng, Neo, and Li Auto tend to get most of the attention when it comes to EV automakers. China's more traditional, older automakers, companies like GWM, SAIC, and Geely, have been producing their own electric cars for quite some time. There was, however, one large company that was not, and that was Changan. In this year, 2022, that has changed with the introduction of the Shenlan brand, and this, the SL03. Did they use their time wisely to come up with something very impressive, or is it going to be too little too late? Let's find out.
With hands-on test drives and reviews of exciting Chinese market vehicles, Wheelsboy is the #1 source for China auto insights. Be sure to check us out on Instagram and Facebook. Shenlan, which translates to deep blue, is actually one of 2 EV brands that Changan debuted this year. The other is a premium brand called Avatar. Hopefully we'll bring you a review of their first model, the Avatar 11, later this year.
The SL03 is aimed squarely at the Tesla Model 3, but its design language is much more aggressive than the Tesla. I know styling is subjective, but I think when you park these two cars next to each other, the Tesla looks a bit like a potato. And that's before we get to these crazy daytime running lights that look like, I don't know, a gun sight, or maybe the barrel of some sort of futuristic plasma weapon.
Despite having a more aggressive design language, the overall shape of the SL03 is actually quite traditional. It's an honest-to-goodness liftback, but the way the beltline ends with a horizontal line gives it the profile of a traditional 3-box sedan. The length of 4.82 meters makes it 10 centimeters or 4 inches longer than a Model 3.
Any attempt at subtlety has been pretty much abandoned when it comes to the rear design of this car, particularly the shape of the taillight here, which further emphasizes the gun sight LEDs. This thing is definitely made for the Call of Duty generation. Luckily, there's plenty of space back here for you to fit enough equipment to have a fun LAN party with all of your buddies. God, I sounded old when I said that, didn't I?
At a price of $25,000 to $30,000 US, the EV versions of the SL03 undercut the base Tesla Model 3 by $10,000 to $15,000 US here in China. It's also cheaper than the BYD Seal, which starts at $29,000.
I'll be honest with you, there isn't a lot to talk about when it comes to the interior of the SL03, because there isn't really a lot going on. Compared to the perhaps over-styled interior of the BYD Seal, this thing is incredibly minimalist, especially in this black color. It's just black on black on black on black, everywhere you look. The only splashes of color are some stitching, maybe some speaker grills, and a little bit of pink gold thread on the seats. I mean, come on. Even a Tesla Model 3 has wood trim on the inside of its barren interior. As we previously discussed when reviewing the Voya Free, all these new brands need a kind of party trick to separate themselves from the crowd. In the case of this car, it's a screen that turns. No, I don't mean that it flips like a BYD going from portrait to landscape or landscape to portrait. I mean that it literally can change its angle from right to left or being in the center. This is accomplished a couple of different ways, including a slider here on the screen, or using voice commands. 你好, Shenlan.
在的。
屏幕右转.
已将旋转屏调节到偏右位置.
It's not quite as dramatic as the party tricks from other brands, but it's also not quite as useless.
Once you turn the screen to your desired angle, you can enjoy snappy response times thanks to the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8155 processor, something we usually see on more expensive vehicles.
It had better be snappy too, because everything is controlled using this center screen, from the windshield wipers to the headlights to the glove box. The only physical buttons are found on this leather-wrapped steering wheel. This is the only real leather in the car, by the way. The rest of it is a soft faux leather. Everywhere else, well, pretty darn plasticky. The cover of the 14-speaker Sony sound system over here is a good example. But hey, that's the price you pay for paying less. The wheelbase of the SL03 is slightly longer than that of a Tesla Model 3, but its rear seats are probably the biggest weak point of the entire interior. It's not because of legroom. As you can see with the seat adjusted for me, there is plenty of space here. The floor also very flat, if a bit high, but that's a common problem with EVs. The problem is up here. When it comes to headroom, I am 5'9", about 1.75 meters tall, and I can barely squeeze more than a finger between my head and the roof. if you hit a bump while riding in the back of this car, you will hit your head on the ceiling. I am forced to assume that Changan employed a team of Oompa Loompas to engineer this car. If you manage to remain conscious after hitting your head on the ceiling, you will realize that there's only one USB port down here. Overall, not very impressed.
The SL03 isn't just available as a pure EV, there's also an extended range EV model that costs $23,500 US. It packs a 1.5-liter 4-cylinder generator powering a rear-mounted motor making 160 kilowatts and 320 newton-meters of torque, or 215 horsepower and 235 pound-feet. Its 28.4 kilowatt-hour battery pack gives it a pure EV range of 200 kilometers on the CLTC cycle, but a combined range of 1,200 kilometers. That same electric motor powers the long-range, pure EV version of the SL03, this time paired with a much larger 80 kilowatt-hour battery pack for a CLTC range of 705 kilometers.
What we're driving right now is what I consider to be the Goldilocks version of this car. That's a standard range car which has a 58.1 kilowatt hour battery pack and a range of 515 kilometers. But that's not what matters. What matters to me is that this thing is 190 kilowatts instead of 160. That means 255 horsepower and a 0 to 100 time of 6 seconds flat. That's faster than the base versions of both the Tesla Model 3 and the BYD Seal. So how does the rest of the driving experience compare to something like a Model 3? Well, I would say the steering is both less communicative and less direct. The Model 3 also feels more hunkered down than this car, which rides more like a lowered SUV than a sporty sedan. I think one reason for that is the fact that this car comes with so many different powertrain options. You see, in addition to the extended range EV and the pure EV, there's also a fuel cell EV, as in a hydrogen version of this car. That one, by the way, costs $103,000 US. Who in their right mind would spend $103,000 on a $25,000 car? I do not know, but that's not what matters. What matters is that when you have to include so many different powertrains, there has to be some compromises in the packaging. That could be where you put the battery or maybe the packaging of the suspension, but either way, I think it's a contributing factor. Quick side note, one thing that this thing can do that the rear-wheel drive versions of the BYD Seal and the Tesla Model 3 cannot is slide. Of course, this is a private owner car that we've borrowed, and the guys only put like 1,400 kilometers or about 1,000 miles on it, so we're not out here going full drifto. So what does this car offer if you're just trying to drive like a normal human being instead of a complete hooligan? The answer is quite a bit. The ADAS system, which is camera-based by the way, comes with a lane change assist, adaptive cruise control, and automatic emergency braking, among other things. The EV versions of the car also come standard with an augmented reality heads-up display, a very crisp one at that. The car doesn't have the same sporty driving dynamics of a Tesla Model 3, and it does lack some of the premium feeling in its ride as well, but it's also quite comfortable, at least in daily use. The BYD Seal and the Tesla Model 3 play firmly in the premium category. The SL03, on the other hand, I think it lands more towards the top end of the mainstream category. It offers a lot for this price point, even if that doesn't include the more premium driving experience of those other two rivals. However, if you live in China and you don't want to spend an extra $15,000 for a Model 3 or wait 6 months for a BYD Seal, this might be the EV sedan for you. All right, thanks for watching today's video. Be sure to check us out on all of our social media. Links are in the description below. And as always, like, subscribe, and hit the bell.